My father secretly changed his will to leave everything to my stepmother, saying, "You're young, you'll figure it out." I walked away without a fight and let her enjoy her victory. A year later, she called me frantically. "Why is the bank freezing my accounts?" I smiled and said, "Check the fine print." I never expected my father to be the type of man who would pull something like this. My mother died when I was 10, and for years, it was just the two of us. He remarried when I was in my early 20s to a woman named Claire, and I won't lie, I never really liked her. She was younger than him by nearly 20 years, but I kept my mouth shut. My father seemed happy, and after everything we'd been through, I figured he deserved that. But here's the thing about Claire. She wasn't subtle. She played the long game, and I have to admit, she played it well. She was sweet, attentive, always making sure my dad had everything he needed. At first, I thought she was just a good wife, but looking back, I can see it all for what it really was: an act, a carefully calculated performance to secure her future. When my father got sick, everything changed. He had always been a strong man, but cancer doesn't care how tough you are. It eats away at you, strips you down to nothing. I spent every moment I could by his side while Claire played the role of the grieving wife, fluttering around, making sure he was comfortable. I wasn't in the room the day he changed his will. Claire made sure of that. I only found out after he was gone. I sat in the lawyer's office expecting to hear what my father had always promised me, that everything would be split fairly. Instead, the lawyer cleared his throat, shifted uncomfortably, and read aloud the words that still make my blood boil. "To my beloved wife, Claire, I leave everything." Everything. The house, the cars, the savings, the investments, everything my father had built, everything my mother had once touched. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the final blow to my daughter: "You're young. You'll figure it out." I didn't say a word. I felt Claire's eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. Maybe she expected me to cry. Maybe she thought I'd yell, accuse her of manipulating him. But I didn't. I stood up, shook the lawyer's hand, and walked out. I let her win. For a whole year, I let her think she had one. She moved into my father's house like she owned the world. She started spending the money like it would never run out. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she was traveling, shopping, living like a queen. She even had the audacity to reach out once. A short, clicked text message. "I hope you're doing well. Your father would want us to stay in touch." I didn't respond. Then, one day, almost exactly a year later, my phone rang. I looked down at the screen and smirked. "Claire." I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was frantic, panicked. "Why is the bank freezing my accounts?" I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment before I answered. "Check the fine print." There was a beat of silence. And then, "What did you do?" Now, here's the thing. My father may have changed his will, but he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He had always been bad with paperwork. And while Claire thought she had manipulated him into signing over everything, she had overlooked one critical detail. The assets weren't solely in his name. The house? It was in a trust that had my name on it alongside his. The investments? Joint accounts. Accounts that legally required both signatures for any major withdrawals or changes. The savings? Same deal. For a year, I let her live in her fantasy world. I let her think she had it all. And then, with one letter to the bank, one legal inquiry, it all came crashing down. Claire lost everything. The house, the money, the lifestyle, gone. I could have let her keep something, I suppose. But then I thought about my mother's belongings, the way Claire had boxed them up and shoved them into storage as if she had never existed. I thought about my father, sick and vulnerable, signing papers he barely understood, and I decided she deserved nothing. So I took it all back. I never heard from her again after that. I hope she figured it out. After that call, Claire disappeared for a while. I figured she was licking her wounds, maybe trying to scrape together whatever scraps she had left. I didn't care. I had what was rightfully mine, and that was the end of it, or so I thought. A few months later, I got another call. This time, it wasn't from Claire. It was from my dad's lawyer. "There's an issue," he said. I sighed, already annoyed. "What now?" He hesitated. "Claire is contesting the trust. She's claiming your father intended to transfer the assets to her but was misled." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. Misled by who? The bank? The lawyers? Reality? He didn't laugh. "She's hired a legal team." I should have expected it. A woman like Claire? She wouldn't go down without a fight. She had spent years working her way into my father's life, and now she wasn't about to let go without trying to squeeze out one last win. She had no case. She had no proof, but she did have money, and money meant good lawyers. Suddenly, I was dragged into a legal war I never wanted. The courtroom battle the day we faced each other in court was the first time I had seen her in over a year. She looked different. The expensive clothes were still there, but there was something off, like she had lost the confidence she used to carry so easily. Or maybe she just wasn't used to fighting battles she wasn't guaranteed to win. She sat across from me, chin high, flanked by her lawyers. They threw every accusation they could at me. They painted her as the devoted wife, the woman my father had wanted to take care of. And me? I was just the bitter daughter, the greedy child who couldn't accept her father's wishes. They even brought up my relationship with him. Tried to suggest we had grown distant, that I hadn't been there for him in his last months. That part stung because it was a lie. I clenched my fists under the table, biting my tongue as my lawyer dismantled every single one of their claims. The judge barely entertained most of their arguments. There was no proof of fraud, no evidence that my father had even attempted to move the trust into her name. But Claire was smart. She had one last trick up her sleeve. A letter. A so-called final note from my father supposedly written in his last days. It was simple. Just a short handwritten note. To my beloved Claire, everything I have is yours. I want you to have it all. It wasn't signed. It wasn't notarized. It wasn't even dated. But it was enough to stall the case, enough for the judge to call for further investigation. And suddenly, I was in real trouble. The secret in the ink I had my doubts from the start. My father was old school. He rarely wrote anything by hand if he could avoid it. And even if he had written a letter like that, there's no way he wouldn't have signed it. I hired a forensic document examiner. If Claire had faked that letter, I was going to prove it. And guess what? She did. The ink was fresh, too fresh for a letter supposedly written over a year ago. Even better, the handwriting wasn't quite right. It was close, but there were small inconsistencies. A rushed copy. A poor imitation of my father's usual writing. The moment I got that report, I knew I had her. We took it back to court, and when the forensic expert testified, I watched Claire's face carefully. She didn't react at first, but then the judge asked her lawyer if they had any response, and that's when she cracked. Claire stood up, her hands gripping the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "This isn't fair," she snapped. I smirked. "Neither is forgery." Her lawyer yanked her back down into her seat, whispering furiously. It didn't matter. She had lost. One last trick. I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. Because just a few weeks later, I woke up to find my house had been broken into. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. But my father's old desk, the one I had moved into my home after winning the case, had been ransacked. Drawers pulled open. Papers scattered. Someone had been searching for something. And I had a very good idea who. Claire wasn't done. And neither was I. I stood in the wreckage of my father's old desk, my heart pounding. It wasn't a random break-in. Someone had been looking for something. Something they thought would change everything. I called the police, but they barely looked around before shrugging. "Nothing's missing," one of them said. "Probably just kids messing around." Kids? In a gated community with security cameras? Not a chance. I knew exactly who was behind it. Claire. She had been desperate before, but now she was reckless. She still thought she had an ace up her sleeve, and I needed to figure out what it was before she made her next move. The fake document, or was it? I spent the next week going through every paper in that desk searching for whatever she had been after. At first, I found nothing. Just old bills, insurance policies, letters my dad had never bothered to throw away. Then I found it. A single, yellowed envelope, wedged behind a drawer. Inside was a document that made my stomach drop. It was another version of my father's will, only this one was different. It was dated months before the one the lawyer had read. And in this version, everything was left to Claire. No trust, no joint accounts, no loopholes. This will would have given her exactly what she had been fighting for. But here's the thing. This will was never filed. It wasn't notarized. There were no witness signatures. It was just a rough draft likely forgotten in the chaos of my father's last months. But if Claire had found it before I did, she could have forged the missing signatures. She could have claimed my father intended for her to have everything, and she might have actually won. I felt sick. Had my father really meant to leave it all to her? Had I been fighting a battle that was never supposed to be mine? I didn't know. And now, I had a choice. Do I burn it or do I use it? I could destroy it. No one would ever know. Or I could turn the tables. I could make sure Claire never got her hands on it, but still use it to my advantage. I made my decision. And then, for the first time in months, I called Claire. The trap she answered on the first ring. "What do you want?" she snapped, trying to sound angry, but I could hear the nervousness beneath it. I let the silence stretch before saying, "You've been busy." More silence. Then, carefully, "I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled. "I think you do." And then I dropped the bomb. I found the will. I could hear her breathing shift. She tried to cover it up with a laugh. "What will?" "The one where my father left everything to you." Silence. Then a low, shaky exhale. "You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I?" I pressed because I'm holding it right now. I heard rustling on her end like she was pacing. "That's impossible," she said. But her voice wasn't as confident as before. She had been looking for it and she had failed. "You know," I continued, "this document could really change things." "What do you want?" she asked, voice tight. I pretended to think. "Well, I could take it to my lawyer, file it myself. But here's the thing, Claire, it's not legally valid. It was never signed, never notarized. Just a draft. A draft you knew about." She didn't say anything, but I could practically hear her mind racing. "So here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to drop the case. You're going to walk away. And if you don't, I let the threat hang." Finally, she laughed. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that meant she thought it was funny. "You think I'm scared of you?" "No," I said. "But I think you're scared of jail." That shut her up. Because now, I had proof that Claire had been trying to manipulate the system. A real will, one that she had known about, that she had searched for, that she had possibly tried to forge, and I was willing to take it straight to court. She hung up without another word. Claire's last move for a few weeks. Everything was quiet. Then, one night, I came home to a flickering porch light and the door, wide open. My stomach clenched. I stepped inside slowly, my fingers tight around my phone, ready to call the police. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. And there, sitting on my couch like she belonged, was Claire, a wine glass in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. She smiled. "Let's talk," she said. And I knew, right then and there, this wasn't over. Claire sat on my couch, swirling the wine in her glass like we were old friends having a chat. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just stood there, staring at her, my pulse hammering. "You left your door unlocked," she said, smirking. She was lying. I never left my door unlocked. This wasn't just her breaking in. This was a power move. She wanted me to know she could still get to me. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "You're out of your mind," I said, voice steady even though my hands were shaking. She shrugged. "Maybe?" Then she lifted the stack of papers she'd brought. "You recognize these?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I knew exactly what they were. The fake will. The one she had tried to use in court. The one I had exposed as a forgery. I tilted my head. "Why do you still have those?" "Your case is dead." She let out a slow, dramatic sigh. "See? That's the thing. You think you won. But you don't understand, do you?" She set the papers down and leaned forward. "This was never about money." I laughed sharp and bitter. "That's rich coming from you." She smiled. "You think this was just greed?" "No. This was survival." I frowned and then she told me the truth. The secret Claire had been hiding. "I loved your father," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Not at first. Maybe. But over time, I did. He took care of me. He gave me a life I never thought I'd have. And when he got sick, when I knew I was going to lose him, I panicked." She took a shaky breath looking down at her wine glass. "You don't know what it's like to go from having everything to nothing. You had your whole life ahead of you. You had a career, friends, a future. Me? I had nothing. No real job, no savings. I gave up everything to be with your father, and when he died, I was supposed to just disappear." She looked up at me then, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite place. "Your father knew. He knew I was scared. He promised me he'd take care of me. He wanted me to have everything. He just never got around to finalizing it." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "And then you," she said, her expression hardening. "You just walked away. Let me think I had one. Let me think I was safe. And then, just when I started to believe it, you ripped it all away." She stood up slowly, wine glass still in hand. "You didn't do it because you wanted justice. You did it to punish me." I clenched my jaw. "You manipulated a dying man." She tilted her head. "Did I? Or did I just ask him to do what he wanted to do?" That stopped me. Because for all the fights, all the lies, all the court battles, I would never know the truth. Had my father really meant to leave it all to her? Or had she just been there at the right time whispering in his ear when he was too weak to fight back? I'd never know. And maybe that was the worst part. The breaking point. Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You took everything from me," she said. "And now I have nothing left to lose." I tensed. "Are you threatening me?" She smiled. "No. Just telling you how it is." Then, in one smooth motion, she threw the glass of wine against the wall, shattering it. I flinched, but I didn't back away. We stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other. And then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a cruel one. A tired, broken laugh. And then she wiped her eyes. "I thought I could win," she murmured. "I really thought I could." She turned toward the door. I didn't stop her. She walked out without another word. And just like that, Claire was gone. The aftermath, I didn't hear from her for weeks. I thought maybe she had finally given up. Maybe she had moved on. Then one day, I got a letter. No return address. Just a single page inside. I hope you sleep well at night. That was it. No threats. No begging. Just that one sentence. And the worst part? I didn't sleep well. Not for a long time. Because no matter how much I told myself I had done the right thing, a part of me wondered if I had just been another player in the game. If my father had really meant to leave it all to Claire, then I had stolen her future. But if he hadn't, if she really had manipulated him, then I had just given her what she deserved. I would never know for sure, and I had to live with that. The resolution: a year passed. I never saw Claire again. Never heard from her. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder. Not because I was scared of her, but because I was scared of the truth I would never get. In the end, I won. But it didn't feel like a victory. And maybe that's the thing about revenge. You get what you wanted, but you don't always get what you needed. The end.